on my own. All right. Let's. Anybody have a question, Bible question that you have studied, looking for an answer for? Doug? Where are we headed? Anybody else have a question while we're waiting for Doug to find his? Anybody else have a question? Bible question, Zach. Bible question. All right. You have 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Your time is up. Don't distract him. 1 Timothy what? 1 Timothy chapter 6. Materialism. God is blessing me because I have all these wonderful things. Some people think that you determine God's blessing by the material things that we have. That's a sensual, carnal way of determining God's blessing. Let me give you a church identity. A church of 3,000 must be doing something great for God rather than a church of 30. That doesn't always mean that. Sometimes it's just a greater place of carnality and entertainment rather than a place of true worship. Job's friends thought that he must have sinned a great sin because all the things that he had were taken from him, so they looked at that as a punishment. That's kind of the same idea in reverse. So then when you say, well, godliness with contentment is great gain. So the gain is our attitude towards how we live this life, rather than thinking that, and part of that is to help us. The Christian life is not there to make life easy for us. Matter of fact, the Christian life sometimes makes it harder. That's just the reality, because you have people that oppose you because they don't want to be made feel guilty for the things that you won't do, and they know that they're doing them, and so that makes them feel guilty, and they don't like you because you're making them feel bad. So, if I have a lot of friends, then I must be doing something right. That doesn't always mean that. So the things of this world are not a barometer as to whether God is blessing me or not. God can choose to bless me with those things, but that's not a barometer of all things. Same idea. Right. No, I mean, even Christ said of the money changers in the temple that it should have been a house of prayer, and they've made it a den of thieves. It became a business. It was not about worship. And so in Titus, he's talking in verse 11 of chapter 1, teaching things which they ought not for filthy lucre's sake. So they're, I don't want to get political. I have a great political comparison. Well, let's just say this. We have millionaires in the House and Senate who are telling us that we ought to learn how to do with less. so we can help the people that have little. Yeah. Yes. So that's, to me, that is a, there are things that they are, Bernie Sanders, is it Bernie Sanders? The communist? He's a multimillionaire, but he's promoting socialism, which will make everybody destitute. So, it's good for everybody else. It's just they don't live that life. Al Gore talks about global warming, but he has his own personal jet, and his footprint is bigger than most people's footprint. His carbon footprint is much larger than the average person. But, Nancy Pelosi has a wall around her house, but she doesn't want to have a wall to protect our country. I mean, those are those kinds of mindset. But that's all political. That's not really biblical in nature. That's just what came to my mind. That, a preacher ought not to preach about something that he is guilty of, unless he's trying to correct himself. Okay, anybody else? Bible question? All right, let's hand out the flyer or the papers. We're in Luke chapter 17. Luke chapter 17. Remember from last week, thank you. No, I'm okay. I have a drink back here. Luke chapter 17, where the Bible talks about having faith as a grain of a mustard seed. Just let them hand it out. Just be patient. Last week we talked about the subject of forgiveness, and Jesus, told them that they should be willing to forgive a person 7 times in a day for the same offense. And their response was, Lord, increase our faith. So what they thought Jesus was asking was a very hard thing to do. And honestly, it is. Forgiving somebody when they've hurt you is not easy to do. But it's not. Why do we do the right thing? We do the right thing because it's the right thing to do. We don't do it whether it's easy or pragmatic, that it works. We forgive because we're commanded to. And that's what he talks about in these next verses here. So, after they say, Lord, increase our faith, what they're saying is, I need more faith to be able to do what you just said. Now, that's very critical to your understanding of what he's about to teach. Their response to forgiving somebody 7 times in a day is, Lord, increase our faith. Look at verse 6 then. And the Lord said, this is his response to them, if ye had faith as a grain of mustard seed, ye might say unto this sycamine tree, be thou plucked up by the root, and be thou planted in the sea, and it should obey you. So the first thing he talks about is, if you have just a little bit of faith, you can do something very great. All right? So if you had faith as a grain of mustard seed, that's really a small seed. And he's saying if you had that little of a faith, I mean, that's something that would be hard to keep in your hand because it would slip through your fingers. And you say to the sycamine tree, and don't get bogged down in some of the details. What's a sycamine tree? Don't worry about that. Any tree. Say that tree, be thou moved, be thou plucked up by the root, and be thou planted in the sea. And he says, if you have that little bit of faith, that it will obey you. It should obey you. All right? Now, so that makes you realize what he is trying to get them to see. Jesus is saying that it doesn't take a large amount of faith to forgive someone. For even a small amount of faith can do something great, like plucking a tree up and planting it in the sea. And now, I put the word meditate there. Meditate means to think about, contemplate. The Bible in the book of Psalms has the word Selah, and that's the idea of meditating. Think about what you've just read. Now, and so the size of our faith is not what is doing the work. Now I want you to think, because Because if you think that you have to have great faith to do great things, you're putting the power on the faith. It is God who does the work. Faith is simply believing that God can. He has to do the work. Man looks at it like this. If it's a big task, then a big faith is required. No. A big God is required. I can have a little bit of faith in a big God, and God will show himself capable. So God is saying a little faith can do great things because faith is not doing the work God is. So that's a mindset. That's a very important thought, and you'll understand it more when we get down through this passage. Faith is simply our ability to trust God at his word. Did I skip one? Okay. Let me get the answer, your sheet out so I don't do that. God is saying a little faith can do great things because faith is not doing the work God is. Faith is not doing the work God is. Okay? And then faith is simply our ability to trust God at his word. When God says, I'm going to do this or this is going to happen, then you need to trust God. That's what faith is. It's believing what God has said. God is the one doing the work. I don't need a lot of faith to believe that God can do a great task. I need to just accept that God is capable of doing it. So I'm not putting my effort on my faith. I'm putting the effort on God's ability. That's why the three Hebrews in the book of Daniel, they answer the king, "We be not careful to answer thee, O king. Be it known unto thee, our God can deliver us. But if not," I said that wrong. "But if not, be it known unto thee, O king, we will not bow down." All right, so they knew that God was capable. They didn't waver in their faith, but their faith was not what saved them. It was the fact that they knew God could deliver them. And that's why they wouldn't bow down. Do I really believe what God says? It doesn't take a large amount of faith to forgive someone. It just takes obedience in Christ. That's the point that Christ is trying to bring about. Forgiving someone is not about how great a faith you have, as they suggested, Lord, increase our faith. It's simply, are you going to obey God? And if you say, no, I'm not going to obey God because I don't want to forgive that person, okay, what other areas are you going to disobey God in? So you can see the problem that you create when you start dictating what things you're going to obey God in and what things you won't. And we have Christians all over the world who are picking and choosing what they want to do for God. And their excuse sometimes is, well, I don't have enough faith. No, you don't have enough trust. You don't believe God is capable, and therefore your faith seems little. But the problem is not your faith, it is your view of God, your understanding of God. Jesus didn't need to increase the size of the faith of the disciples. They already had faith. And he assures them and states that even though their faith may be small, God can accomplish great things through them. And we know that he did. He did some amazing things through them. They went on to share the good news about Jesus, even in the face of some strong opposition, being brought before rulers and judges, being imprisoned and even killed. They remained faithful unto the Lord. Now look at verse 7, because he gives us it's not a parable, but he uses an illustration. Which of you, having a servant plowing or feeding cattle, will say unto him by and by when he is come from the field, go and sit down to meat? Now, you're not gonna appreciate this as much because we live in a different time today. But if you had somebody that was your servant, or you could use the boss analogy. If you're the boss of the house, of the plantation, you own it, or you run it, and you have somebody that's working in the field. He's worked all day in the field, and he comes in, and this is what a lot of husbands do. They come home, and they kind of sorry. They're just kind of, they become a couch potato the rest of the night. Laid out, ain't doing nothing. And the owner comes out and says, hey, that's okay. I understand you've worked hard. Just take it easy. I'll fix something for you. The Bible, Jesus is saying that's not what reality was in his day. Look at the next verse. And will not rather say unto him, make ready wherewith I may sup, and gird thyself and serve me till I have eaten and drunken, and afterward thou shalt eat and drink. So this is what Jesus said. If you're truly a servant, instead of coming home and plopping and taking care of yourself, before you concerned about yourself, you make sure the master's been fed. Well, I've worked all day. I know, but he's the master. His care is more important than your own. If you're a servant. Now, if you call yourself a servant, but you're really a princess inside wanting to come out, or a prince, let me say for the guys, prince, because I don't want you to be a princess. You want to be, you want to call yourself a servant, but you want to be a prince or a princess, and you're looking for the easy road. This is why I say Christianity is not easy. So Christ is saying, if you're truly a servant, you're not done until the master says you're done. There's a task for you to do. Now, this ties into the forgiveness thing, so don't lose sight of that. All right, so in verse 7, but which of you having a servant, that's the key word there, a servant, plowing or feeding cattle, will say unto him by and by, when he is come from the field, go and sit down to meat, and will not rather say unto him, make ready wherewith I may sup, and gird thyself, and serve me. Are you a servant or not? When you've worked a long day, when you've done everything that you've been asked to do, but you're not done with the day, there's still service to be done. We live in a day where we don't think in those terms anymore. People have a job so they can have the weekend off, or they can have days off, and they can blow their money ever any way they want. That's how they work a job, not because they want to do the job. They work so they can have money, so they can spend it however they want. And that makes not a good employee for the employer. Much better is an employee who loves the job that he's doing, loves the company he works for, and sacrifices himself to make sure that they have what they need before he takes care of himself. And what God is saying, that's how we ought to treat God. Before we take to our own ease, we're going to make sure that we've done everything the Lord has asked us to do. Okay? Now that seems, again, you might say, oh boy, increase my faith. Wait a minute. We've already dealt with that. He is still a servant. So if his master says, fix me some food, he does it. He doesn't come in, plop on the couch and say, well, I've served you today. Fields are done. Master, give me something to eat. No, the servant serves the master. All right, now meditate upon that. Think about that. If you contemplate that, what does that mean for your life? How should I serve the Lord? And that's where we're starting to get. That's what Christ is using these illustrations of forgiveness and now of this servant to try to get us to understand what our responsibility is. Why did Jesus say this? He wants the disciples to remember who is master of their lives. And that means I can do whatever he tells me. So when he tells me to forgive someone, I must forgive. Whether it's easy or convenient or comfortable, I must forgive. If God gives you a list of 10 things to do, you're not obedient to him until all 10 things are done. 7 out of 10 is not good enough for the master. So it doesn't require a great amount of faith to do what we're supposed to do. It takes obedience. I've had people say, well, if I had more faith, I would do that. No, what you need is more obedience. You're using faith as a cop-out to disobey. See how we sometimes may put the emphasis on our faith instead of on God's ability? That's why we have to be very careful here. Look at verse 9. Doth he, meaning the master, doth he thank that servant because he did the things that were commanded him? Now he uses an old English word here, I trow not. I trow not. What does trow mean? It means to think. I think not. I think not. So the disciples thought Jesus was asking something so hard they needed more faith. No, they just needed to be obedient. If I tell you you should forgive somebody 7 times in a day, then I ought to forgive them 7 times in a day. You say, that's hard. Yes. Obedience is not always easy. Look at verse 10. Now he brings it full circle. So likewise ye, when ye shall have done all those things which are commanded you, say, we are unprofitable servants. We have done that which was our duty to do. Whoa. You told me to do the field. I did the field. I'm all done. You ever have your parents, young people, your parents ask you to do something and you did what they asked, but they're still not quite happy? Maybe you didn't do it exactly they wanted to do it, the way they wanted it done. Right? That gets on your nerves. Hey, who's the master of the home? Let me give you one good indicator. It's not you. But in our society, that's what kids have become. You have to serve me. No, it doesn't work that way. And if you want to be a Christian testimony to your parents, especially if they're not saved, then you have to guard that even more. And so the idea is, and this is why I tried to teach Jonathan, tried to teach Caleb, I've taught my sons. When you're working with somebody and they tell you some things to do and you get done before you're supposed to, look for something else to do. Don't just be content to do what you were asked to do, go beyond. Hey, Doug. Great. Tell us afterwards. When you have one of that's what we're talking about is in a secular sense is called character. That I don't just do the very minimum. I'll give you an example of 2 men that were, one was a deacon, one was not, in my church in Ohio that I pastored years ago. And they worked for an electric company. And that means that they sat in front of these gauges and all this huge board, and they made sure everything was working right, and they'd have to adjust this and adjust that, and they'd have to do other things. And they got to where the company was hurting for money. I don't know how when electric is so expensive. But the company was hurting for money, and so they said, we're going to cut back the hours of the janitors. So when you're at a moment in your time of work and you have a slow time, go ahead and sweep the floors and try to clean up the place. And one of the men, who was the deacon, said, I can't believe they're making me sweep the floors. I got to do this, and I shouldn't have to sweep the floors. That's below my pay grade. And the other guy said, I can't believe they're going to pay me $15 to sweep the floor. There's a right attitude. The one that was the deacon had an attitude of pride. He wasn't a servant to his company. It was about him. It wasn't about what they needed to do. And so, when there's a need, when the master has a need, you seek to fulfill that need. And you look beyond what is obvious and try to do even a little bit more than what the Lord asks of you. And so he says, if I only do that which is required, if I do that which is my duty. Now, duty is something that you fulfill because it's on the list. I fulfilled the list. I did everything you asked to do. Yeah, there's other things that needed to be done, but that wasn't on the list. You ever given an answer to your parent? Well, you didn't say I had to do that. What you just revealed was you were doing your duty, but the thing that should have made it more obvious to you what you could have done would have been your heart being a servant to your parents and going just a little bit farther. Jesus spoke to the people this way. Back in Jesus' day, on the Sabbath, it is illegal for a Jew to go more than a mile on the Sabbath day, to walk more than a mile. And so that's why the Jews would live within a community close to the synagogue so they could get to the synagogue without going over a mile. So that means that the populations were very dense around those places. And but Jesus, and in the Roman Empire times, you had soldiers who would compel a citizen to carry his things for the most he could make them go was a mile. And the Lord said, was it the Lord or was it Paul? I'm not remembering right now. But he said, take it a second mile. Go a second mile. What? By law, all that they can make me do is take it the mile. Yeah, that's your duty as a citizen for that soldier. But if you want to make an impact upon him about your testimony and the priorities of your life, the values of your life, you're going to take it the second mile. If you ask for a coat, you give him your cloak also. You go beyond what there is required of you because you're trying to make an influence on that person's life. Far better for us. You know, here's an illustration. You ever go to a fast food store in the drive-thru, and I've seen both responses. I've watched both responses. They give you the wrong change. They've given you too much money back. And I've seen people pull up, put the car in park, go in, and give them their money back. And I've also seen Christians who said, woohoo! They didn't know how to count their money. Losers, finders, keepers, losers, weepers. You know, they're, woohoo! We get to keep some money. Now, which is the right attitude? That's not your money. You say, well, they added it wrong. Yeah, but you know what's going to happen to that person? At the end of the day, they're going to count his drawer, and they're going to find out that he or she miscalculated, and most of the time, not every time, I don't know how every business works, but a lot of businesses will say that comes out of your paycheck. So you've just taken money out of that guy's paycheck. So how do you feel about that? That's still called stealing. If you know that the amount given you is wrong, you ought to make that right. Amen. You're welcome. Everybody loves that. But that's what Christ is talking about here. Why would I do that? Well, one, it's a good testimony. If you've ever done that, and I'm sure probably Terry has done that, knowing his character. I'm assuming Chris has done that. I'm not if it's happened to you. But when you go in and tell them, you gave me too much money, they'll look at you like, really? They don't know how to take that. And I said, well, I'm just trying to be honest. And that's a great time to hand them a gospel tract. Because you've just shown them there's a difference in the way you look at things. And you have a testimony now before them. So there's a reason that God tells us some of these things. Sometimes it's for our own benefit. We are losing the value of work and an honest day's wage today. And it's something that I've always tried to instill in my boys, and I've seen him do that with others. When you're on a snowy day, we get a big snowstorm, I'd load up the boys and we'd go help some of the widows, some of the people in the church, and shovel out their driveway. I never forget, we were doing one driveway, and there was another. The neighbor's driveway was right next to, right next to each other. And she was also a single lady. I don't know if she was a widow or not, but while we were doing, who was that? Eleanor. We were doing Eleanor's driveway so that she could drive out of her driveway. I started doing the other ladies. Well, she thought I was taking Eleanor's snow and putting it on her driveway. And so she stepped out on her porch and says, "What are you doing?" And I thought she was kidding. I said, "Just cleaning your driveway, ma'am." And she went, "Oh," and she turned around and went inside. She was ready to yell at me, thinking I was dumping snow on her driveway. "You gonna throw?" She didn't know how to take that. But Eleanor told her who I was. That's a testimony. Why do you do things like that? Well, one, I want to honor those who ought to be honored and are elderly. But also, it's a good testimony. And my boys, there were times when people would pay us, and there were times they didn't pay us, and I told them never expect to be paid and always be willing to do it for nothing. God will take care of you. God will make the payment. He'll provide for you. You don't have to go begging. Be a servant. Learn to be a servant. I'm convinced you can never lead until you've first learned to serve. Be a good servant. When you have, when they say, I've had people come in just before the start of the service say, Pastor, the toilet's running over. You know, really? I'm getting ready to get up and preach, and you want me to go? I'll do that, and I've gone and done that. I don't think that's what my responsibility should be at that moment in time. Sometimes somebody says, the toilet's running over, and everybody's looking for something to be busy at. I ain't touching the toilet. And I go by this principle. I'm not going to ask somebody to do something that I'm not willing to do. So if I'm going to ask somebody else to do something, I better have done it. And that can be all kinds of nasty things. So if I ask you to do something that's unpleasant, you can rest assured I've had to do it. My first ministerial experience out of college was the pastor. I think the pastor was waiting for me to arrive. They had a bell tower that had been there since the beginning of the church, and he wanted to clean out the bell tower. Well, what gets up in the bell tower? Pigeons and birds, and so he had me climb up to the bell tower, scrape all the poo into a bucket, and then lower it down to him. They didn't teach me how to do that in Bible college. But how I looked at it was, hey, I'm serving the Lord. This is what the pastor wants me to do. I'm serving the Lord. Did I enjoy it? Absolutely not. But I did it anyway. And so if I ever have you clean out a bell tower, you know that I've done that. Been there, done that. Didn't get a t-shirt either. So when Christ says to us here, so likewise ye, when ye shall have done all those things which are commanded you. So here's the idea. Duty says I'll do what I'm commanded to do. Love makes me look for more to do. Makes me willing to do more than what I am commanded to do. And that's, to me, the story behind God's grace given to us. When I recognize what God has done in my life and what he has saved me from, and the life that I now have the ability to live because of the wonderful grace of God, there's nothing he can ask that's too far or too hard or too much. And I learn to be a servant, and it changes my outlook on life. It helps me perceive things much better, much more clearly. All right. So ask yourself, am I a servant? Do you even go so far as to do everything that's asked of you? Do you even do that? And if that's all you do, recognize God says you're an unprofitable servant. I want to be, Paul said that he was finishing his course. He had kept the faith. And he wanted to be faithful through to the end of his life. And I think he was espousing the message of Christ in doing that. All right, let's go ahead and take some prayer requests tonight. Kevin? While Daniel's been gone, we've done a lot of work on his house. And while the Kohlers were gone, we had the older workers in there sucking dust and getting all dirty. And we have some pictures from that first week. And since the Kohlers have been back, they've spent a lot of time over there, and they can show you pictures of themselves. They don't like pictures taken. I don't know why they hide every time I bring my camera out. But that's out of a duty or out of a love, because they're doing not something very pleasant, but it is a great blessing. And I'm planning on taking Daniel over to see his house tonight. He saw it? Oh, you? Well. All right. I don't know where the box went. Oh, here it is. Pray for our missionaries, each one. Thank you. And the needs there. Some of the people we've been praying for, Debbie Black, she's now out of hospital, out of Cleveland Clinic and home. We had a great response for Mrs. Curlin. And I appreciate you to continue to pray for them. They're going to do some tests to make sure there's nothing further there. Yes. Okay. Wow, okay. I hadn't seen that. I've not been on the computer much today or yesterday. It was cancer. Andrew got his tickets to go to Ukraine, so pray about that. Pray for him and that trip. We got, I don't want to belabor this or speak much, but Brother Fagale, we need to pray for him coming up in the next few weeks. Very important things over in the Middle East. And pray for Elizabeth. I know she's going to be sad with her brother leaving. They had a great time. Okay, any updates on the need of healing? Different things like that? Or need of salvation? $25. There's no E on horn. Connie?
Number 2, Chris's dad surgery was postponed. He ended up having to have dental work done, and he has to heal. So they're scheduled surgery for April 4th. Just that, and it all depends on if the dental, they actually pull a tooth that had broken half and completely pulled it. So that has to be completely healed before they'll put him under anesthesia for the.
Is it because of an infection?
No infection.
No, I mean, is that why?
No, he actually, because of the pain, was like gritting his teeth and bit down, and it just split in half.
So April 4th is now.
April 4th is now chosen, April 4th. And you can take number 17, my grandmother. She had her appointment with her doctor, and everything's going well. Eating small meals every 2 hours, but she's got herself on a schedule, and just reminding herself to eat. But other than that, she's had no pain, no nausea, no nothing from the surgery, so she's doing really well.
Okay. Others?
Number 20 was Amnesty. As I understand it, she's supposed to go home on Monday and go and stay with the Lord.
That's Jerry Van Heat.
Okay. Okay. Any other prayer requests? Updates? There were some pictures with her, and was that her baby? That was Kelsey's. She looks thin, but she looks really good. I think she's doing well, she's not complained of any problems or anything. Yeah, she's home. She's home.
She said she has a lot more energy now. She's even getting up before now. But, she's amazed at the
Praise the Lord. It's awesome. Okay. Yes, Terry?
They're all, oh, and, oh,
Good. Add a name. Mark Thompson is a young man, we went to Bible college together. He had a son pass away yesterday. He had a stroke, he's either 17 or 19 years old, had a stroke. I believe it was a stroke. And he was improving. He would, for a while there, he was on a deathbed. He got out of that with a feeding tube, and he actually went to church and got to be able to go back and participate with them. And he passed away yesterday very suddenly. I got a prayer request from him like 2 days before that but he didn't give any specifics, and now we know why. So just pray for God's grace. He's saved, young man, but a hard time for them to go through. Mark Thompson. He's in the ministry. I'm not sure if he's a pastor. I think he is. Okay. Terry, are you taking the van? Am I taking the van? What are we doing? Okay. All right. We got about 10 minutes. I think we can have everybody pray. We take some time to pray. And guys, or ladies also, this is time for you to take the list, pray over the ones that you know, and even pray for some of the people you don't know. But it's not a time for you to talk with each other. It's a time for you to talk to the Lord, okay? No more than 2 in a group for the teenagers. And if you want to get by an adult, you can have them as the third. But that way we kind of make sure everything's going all right, okay? We'll pray, and make sure you are aware that you need to leave in about 10 minutes.